Something huge just happened in Japan. A massive earthquake tore through the southern island of Kyushu, and the scenes coming out of it right now are honestly hard to watch. The quake struck Kumamoto Prefecture late Tuesday afternoon, right around 4:27 local time, which is just before sunset there. Japan's own meteorological agency is calling it a magnitude 7.1, while the U.S. Geological Survey has it slightly lower at 6.8. That gap happens a lot with these things, since local seismic networks sitting right on top of the fault tend to pick up details that agencies on the other side of the planet can miss. Either way you slice it, this was a shallow, violent rupture, only about 10 kilometers deep, which is exactly the kind of quake that does the most damage to buildings and roads directly above it, and the damage has been brutal. The Japanese seismic intensity scale topped out at a Shindo 7 in parts of the region, which is the highest reading that scale has. That means the shaking wasn't just strong, it was as strong as the scale is capable of measuring. People who lived through it describe it lasting anywhere from 30 to 50 seconds, which doesn't sound like much until you imagine standing in your kitchen while the floor tries to throw you off your feet for the better part of a minute. The single most devastating scene to come out of this so far is the Aeon Mall in the town of Kashima. Reports describe an explosion, possibly tied to a gas leak, that ripped through the building right as or right after the quake hit. The second floor of that shopping center came down, trapping an unknown number of shoppers and staff inside. Rescue crews have been digging through the wreckage since the moment it happened, and honestly, it echoes something we saw with the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, where it wasn't really the shaking itself that caused the worst destruction. It was the fires and explosions that the shaking set off afterward. As of the latest count, officials are reporting at least 18 people confirmed dead, with more than 60 injured, some of them seriously. Japan's prime minister has already pledged a full government response, and soldiers along with rescue teams are combing through collapsed homes and that mall, searching for anyone still trapped. Given how fluid these situations are in the first 24 to 48 hours, there's a real chance that number climbs before rescue operations wrap up. Beyond the mall, the destruction spread out across the region in ways that paint a pretty grim picture. A train reportedly derailed at a station in Yatsushiro. A chimney came down at a paper factory. The historic stone walls of Kumamoto Castle, a structure that stood for centuries and survived plenty of quakes before, took visible damage this time too. Tens of thousands of households lost power across the Kyushu region. Mobile networks got knocked out in places, and at least one local airport had to suspend operations. Add to that a major expressway that's been so badly damaged it's no longer safe to drive on, and you get a sense of just how widespread this event really was. A tsunami advisory did go out in the immediate aftermath, which is standard procedure anytime a quake this size hits near the coast, but it was lifted fairly quickly, and there's been no significant wave activity reported. That's genuinely one small piece of good news here, because when you look back at Japan's history with earthquakes, it's often the tsunami, not the shaking itself, that ends up being the real killer. The 2011 disaster made that painfully clear. Now here's where things get interesting from a geology standpoint, and it's worth understanding because it explains why people in the region are so on edge right now. This exact stretch of southern Kyushu has been here before. Back in 2016, a nearly identical sequence hit almost the same location, also at a shallow 10-kilometer depth, also along that same fault system running through Kumamoto. That one started with a foreshock in the 6 magnitude range before a bigger quake followed roughly a day later, and by the time the dust settled, that sequence had killed well over 200 people and left thousands more injured, with over 10,000 homes damaged or destroyed. So when seismologists look at this new quake striking basically the same fault line a decade later, they're paying very close attention to whether history is about to repeat, whether this is the main event, or whether it's simply a warning sign of something larger still building underneath. That's not an idle concern either. Japanese authorities have already put out probability estimates for the days ahead, and while the numbers aren't sky high, they're not nothing. There's been chatter about a modest but real chance of a magnitude 7.5 or bigger striking nearby in the near term, alongside slightly lower odds of another strong aftershock further south. It's the kind of uncertainty that keeps entire towns on edge, because when you've just lived through a Shindo 7, the idea that the ground could do that again with even less warning is genuinely terrifying. It's also worth zooming out and looking at what Japan has been dealing with over the past year in general, because this quake didn't come out of nowhere. Southern Japan has been unusually active going back many months now, with a string of magnitude 6 and 7 events hitting the region on what feels like an almost monthly basis recently. Add to that the fact that just about a year ago, almost to the day, Japan was rocked by one of the most powerful earthquakes the country has seen in over a decade, and you start to understand why seismologists have been watching this part of the world so closely. A lot of stress has clearly been building up along these fault systems, and this latest rupture may simply be one more release valve in a much longer sequence that started well before this week. One thing that hasn't escaped attention is how close this earthquake struck to some of Japan's most active volcanic zones. Southern Kyushu is basically dotted with volcanoes, some of them among the most active in the entire country, and there's a well-documented relationship between big, shallow earthquakes and volcanic unrest afterward. It doesn't happen every time a major quake hits nearby, but it happens often enough that monitoring stations will be watching those volcanoes extremely closely over the coming weeks, just to make sure the shaking didn't destabilize anything simmering underground. For now, the priority on the ground is straightforward. Get people out of the rubble, get power and communication restored, and figure out just how bad the damage really is once daylight and full assessments catch up with what happened in those 40-some seconds of shaking. Japan has some of the strictest building codes and best earthquake preparedness in the world, and that's almost certainly part of why the death toll, while tragic, hasn't been anywhere near the scale of some of the country's worst historical disasters. But when a quake hits a populated town directly, at shallow depth, along a fault system known for producing exactly this kind of rupture, there's only so much preparation can prevent. We'll keep tracking this story as new information comes in, especially anything on the rescue efforts at that mall and whether the aftershock activity settles down or escalates. If you want updates as this develops, make sure you're subscribed and drop your thoughts in the comments. Sending strength to everyone in Kumamoto and across Kyushu right now. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.